Ken.
And this is Paradise After Dark.
Dark.
Paradise After Dark is an independent podcast covering true crime,
unsolved mysteries,
missing people,
and urban legends.
If you would like to support our show and get a bunch of extra Paradise After Dark content, sign up for our Patreon at patreon.com/Palmahawk Media. That's PALMAHAWK Media.
And be sure to check out our website at paradiseafterdark.com.
On our website, you'll find links to all of our episodes, even the archived ones, our mailing list, merch store, links to all our social medias, and of course our Patreon.
We also have a virtual tip jar, so leave us a tip and we'll give you a shout out on the show.
Speaking of shout outs, let's give a shout out to Nicole from Jacksonville.
Thank you, Nicole.
And Brian from New York.
New York City.
New York. I don't know if it's New York City. I just know it's New York.
That guy's made in New York City. And Tina from a little unknown town of San Francisco.
Oh, San Francisco.
San Fran. That's like from the other side.
We're like reaching the other side of the country nowadays.
I'm telling you. I wonder if they're like from Florida or something, and they just like search for the podcast and then find it.
I really actually want to give another quick shout out to one of our patrons, Bug. She literally jumped from the urban legend level to the true crime level.
Whoa, that's like
on our Patreon. Whoa. That is like the big time.
Whoa.
So thank you so much for supporting the show and all that good stuff.
Yeah, we hope you're enjoying it. We have a lot of content there. I mean, so if you want to come and join us on Patreon, come and join us. There's a lot of stuff on there. We got a mess of different things that we've done through the course of 4 years of doing this.
Yeah.
So just come and, give us a listen. Hang in there for a couple months and give us a shot. See what you think. So with that being said, I think tonight we want to go to this case that Lauren and I have actually worked on numerous times here and there, pieces a little bit, to try to make sure we got everything put together. Because this is a serial killer out of Florida. Which we're not huge fans of covering serial killers, although now that we're expanding, we're going to kind of do so. This guy is pretty close to home for us.
Yeah, he is.
So, Lauren, you want to go ahead and get us started?
Well, tonight's episode is about Bobby Joe Long. So I'm going to just start from the beginning here. Robert Joseph Long, a.k.a. Bobby Joe Long, abducted, sexually assaulted, and murdered at least 10 women in the Tampa Bay, Florida area during an 8-month period in 1984.
That we know of.
But Long's reign of terror doesn't start or end with that 8-month period. So let's just rewind here. Bobby Joe Long was born October 14th, 1953 in Canova, West Virginia. His parents, Luella and Joe, split when Bobby Joe was a young boy, and he spent most of his childhood with his mother in Florida, moving to Miami in 1955. At age 4, he almost drowned at the beach when pulled underwater by a wave. He later blamed his mother for the incident, claiming she was looking at men instead of watching him. Long was injured several times as a child. Some of these injuries caused some serious head trauma. At age 5, he fell from a swing and was knocked unconscious with an injury to the head. His eyelid was skewered by a stick as well. And at age 6, he was thrown from a bicycle into a parked car. Injuries included the loss of several teeth and a severe concussion.
So pretty much to say he's kind of a lucky kid.
Not so much.
Jeez.
Bobby Joe Long failed the first grade in his Miami school, but passed the second time around after his parents remarried and they moved back to West Virginia. Not long after, at age 7, Bobby Joe Long was hit by a car.
I just want to go on record and say he's not blind. I mean, he can see.
Yes.
He just has just the worst luck possible.
He was hit in the face by the car's bumper and was knocked unconscious. And he was hospitalized in West Virginia as a result of those injuries. And later that same year, he nearly died when he darted in front of another car, badly injured his teeth, and was left with a deformed jaw following the accident. Around age 8, Long fell from a pony and landed on his head. leaving him dizzy and nauseous for several weeks. And a year later, he fell from a fence and required stitches on the left side of his head. Now, as I said, a lot of head trauma, obviously. Interestingly, though, Bobby Joe Long was born with an extra X chromosome. Now, I've heard of this before, but I know not many people have heard of this before. Also known as 47XXY, a specific variant of Klinefelter syndrome. This disorder causes the body to produce too much estrogen. Because of this, Bobby Joe Long grew breasts during puberty and was severely teased. He later underwent breast reduction surgery as a teenager.
And when Long was about 10, his parents' marriage failed again. So as if his life wasn't terrible enough, his parents get back together, and then, he's happy. He's got mom and dad again, and then they split again because obviously it's not working. Now his mother moves back to Florida, where they shared a crowded house with several of his aunts and cousins, and Long had to share a bed with his mother. So now they're sleeping in the same exact room. And when
Same bed.
Well, yeah, exactly. And
at age 10. That's
the age when you
you
really kind of want to get away from your parents, but understand the situation. You moved down to Florida, you don't have much, so this is what you do. But understand, he blames his mother for a lot of the things that have occurred and have happened to him in his life. So this has got to be tough for him. So when he began the 4th grade, and he was teased by other students because of his deformed jaw and teeth.
And breasts, probably.
And breast, I'm sure. Now, Long eventually developed a hatred for women, probably stemming from a very dysfunctional relationship he had with his mother, like we talked about earlier. And he slept in the bed with her until he was a teenager. Luella worked at a bar and wore racy clothing to work and would often bring random men home with her at night, which upset and hurt Bobby, I'm sure. And at age 13, he shot their dog in the vagina, killing the dog. So now this is
He shot the dog in the vagina?
Yes, this is where a lot of times, they say it starts. You always,
right.
I think
obviously.
a lot of times when they do profiling, they always try to look. It's okay. Were there any animal injuries? And I've heard other podcasts doing interviews or talking to people, and they always mention that a lot of times that serial killers begin by hurting animals.
Yeah,
and that's unfortunately what they're trying to. I guess they're testing the waters, if you will. But Bobby claimed that he shot the dog because he resented his mother feeding the dog filet mignon while he was fed a hamburger. So again, he's holding his mother in a lesser regard and holding her feet to the fire, so to speak, blaming her for everything that's wrong with him. And at age 19, Long enlisted in the Army so that he could be an electrician's assistant. He's stationed at Homestead Air Force Base, and this is in Homestead, Florida, near Miami. Mm-hmm. And Long proceeds to marry his childhood sweetheart, Cynthia, in 1974, and they had 2 children.
So Long was involved in a serious accident, another one. He was hit by a vehicle while riding his motorcycle and was subsequently hospitalized for several weeks. While in the hospital, Long's sex drive increased noticeably, speculated to be a result of the accident. He requested frequent sex from Cynthia every time she visited, and the hospital nurses noted that he masturbated 5 or 6 times a day.
Do you think this had anything to do with his condition? The high estrogen, or maybe he's on medication to...
or the brain injury?
Yeah, he said a lot of injuries to the brain, but I couldn't find anything that said he was on any medication to offset the estrogen.
Well, what would cause like a hyper sex drive?
I don't know. I don't have any guess for you.
So he was also discharged from the Army at this time due to this accident. Cynthia later claimed that Long's temperament changed following the accident. While he was always short-tempered, he became physically violent with her and impatient with the children. He also developed a strangely overt, compulsive, and often dangerous sex drive. Crime analysts would later attribute his violent character to a sexual obsession, labeling him a sexual sadist. So Cynthia divorced Long in 1980. So I would say probably this last final injury, brain injury, probably knocked something loose, which caused him to be violent and a dangerous sex drive, sexual sadist. That would be my assumption.
Yeah, I'll just say, I mean, because I asked about the estrogen and any medication, I just looked. I couldn't find anything that said that he was on any type of medications, unless he was just trying to, go at it unmedicated. Which sometimes I think you get to such a point to where the only thing you can really do is get medications to offset the chemical imbalances in your head, or in your body rather.
He had a hormone imbalance.
Exactly. So I'm saying that
he
might
produced
have had,
too much estrogen,
which could have had conflicts, and maybe that's why his high sex drive. I don't know. Maybe our listeners can help us out with that. So many years later, just before Long's execution, in an interview with the Associated Press, Cynthia recalled a time when Long grabbed her, choked her, slammed her head into a television, knocking her unconscious with a gash to her forehead. So now he's getting violent with her. Now, Cynthia said, when I came to, I was on the couch. Of course he was there, crying. I'll never do it again. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Then the next words were, when you drive yourself to get your stitches, if you tell them what really happened, I'll kill you when you get home.
Nice. I'm so sorry. I'll never do it again.
Yeah,
when you drive yourself to get stitches, if you tell them what really happened, I'll kill you.
Exactly. So after the beating that sent Cynthia to the hospital, she said she loaded a shotgun, pointed it at Long, and planned to kill him. But she didn't go through with it. She said not pulling the trigger has haunted her since, knowing the lives that he later destroyed. So here, she's holding herself somewhat responsible for not murdering someone.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? For not killing him. So she's holding herself a little bit responsible, which I guess I can understand, but it's not her fault. This is the things that he did and proceeded to do were not her fault. I have forgiven the man for what he did to me, the name-calling, the physical violence, everything else. I don't think I will ever forgive him for what he has caused my children, nor will I ever forgive him for what he did to those girls, whether they be the murder victims or the rape victims. This is what Cynthia told the Associated Press.
So after his divorce, Bobby Joe Long moved in with a female friend named Susan, who would later accuse him of rape and battery. Starting in 1981, Bobby Joe Long began answering classified ads in the Penny Saver for small appliances. When Long found a woman alone, he asked to use the bathroom and took out his rape kit, which he carried with him, and raped and robbed the woman. He became known as the classified ad rapist. He was tried and convicted for rape in 1981, but requested a new trial, which was granted. The charges were later dropped. In 1983, Long was charged with sending an inappropriate, sex-infused letter and photographs to a 12-year-old Florida girl, earning him a short jail sentence and probation. Long moved to Tampa Bay in 1983.
So now he's jumping to the other coast and moving just a little bit north.
So over in Miami, he was doing this classified ad rape scheme, whatever you want to call it, and he actually has a moniker, the classified ad rapist, over there in Miami.
Yeah.
So then he moves over to Tampa. He gets to Tampa and he met a woman named Elise. The two began dating, and Long seemed to turn things around a little. He began attending church with Elise and also sent his ex-wife, Cynthia, $4,000 in back child support.
Oh, what a stand-up guy.
But then he was found guilty in the battery charge against Susan, who he had moved in with right after his divorce, and sentenced to probation. Long was furious with the sentencing and wrote numerous letters declaring his innocence. The judge again awarded him a new trial. But then he received sentencing for sending a photograph and obscene letter to the 12-year-old girl. Sentence was 2 days in jail plus probation. At this new trial for the Susan assault, he was acquitted. Elise stuck with him through all of this.
And hopefully you'll stick with us through this. Okay, so on March 6th, 1984, Bobby Joe Long committed his first premeditated rape. Now, he selected his victim from a newspaper ad. A woman in Newport Richey, Florida, had placed an ad in an attempt to sell her house. While touring the interior of the house, Long pulled out a gun and forced her into the bedroom, where he proceeded to rape her and steal her jewelry. Now, this MO would continue, and Long would go on to rape approximately 50 women. Now, he often gave the jewelry he stole to his girlfriend, Elise. So, unknowing to her, she's just getting this great jewelry from her boyfriend.
So I just want to rewind real quick because March 6, 1984 was his first premeditated rape. And again, as we had just mentioned before the break, he was raping women over in the Miami area to the point, I don't know how many rape victims there were, but to the point where he was, nicknamed the classified Ad Rapist.
Yeah, this is in the Tampa area. This was the first premeditated in Tampa area.
Now his rapes are getting more sophisticated, more premeditated. He's stalking his victims. He's choosing his victims. He's scoping them out.
Yeah, that's what we're saying is at this point, we believe that this is the first time.
It's escalating.
Because over in Miami, he'd said the ads, and I think that he would go and just kind of feel it out because we don't know all of what occurred in Miami. But at this point, we know that he purposely went out looking to do this crime.
Right. So Hillsborough County had been averaging 30 to 35 homicides per year in the 80s. In 1984, during an 8-month period, a killer with a unique method of binding, raping, and killing his victims, then dumping them in unusual positions and poses, was averaging a murder every other week. And we can spare you the suspense. It was Bobby Joe Long who was doing the killings.
Well, I know there was one point where I've seen an interview with the detective, and he said that when he got the call, he was there. He was about to get off his shift. He gets the call, says that there had been a body found, and he said the whole time he's driving there, he's going, please don't let it be tied up. Please don't let it be bound. Please don't let it. And he showed up, and it was. And he's like, oh, man. Because in his mind, he's thinking, man, please don't let this be a serial killer.
Right.
Because for detectives, that's got to be stressful enough. But now you're not only going to have to try to find a killer, but you've got the whole county on you saying, hey,
you've got to stop him.
Help us.
Stop him before he does it again.
So that was just a little tidbit I want to add there because that's how serious this was, where the detectives and the police force were like, man, please don't let this be what we think it is. And unfortunately, it was.
So like we mentioned, his MO was unique. He was driving around areas known for prostitution and shoddy bars where women were found alone, trolling for victims. He claimed his victims approached him, after which he persuaded them to enter his car and took them to an apartment. There, he bound his victims with rope and ligature collars he fashioned using a variety of rope knots, later confessing that he derived sadistic pleasure from the abduction, rape, and brutal murders of his victims. Some he strangled, others he cut the throats of or bludgeoned to death. The bodies were placed in unique positions or displayed, if you will.
Yeah, he would basically bind them and put them in such a way to where it almost was like a signature at this point. Now, Long's first known victim was a 20-year-old woman named Artise Ann Wick. In March 1984, while still on probation for assault, Long raped and strangled Wick, and her body was discovered in a rural area on November 22, 1984. And in April of 1984, Long abducted Mary Hicks at gunpoint as she drove in her Jaguar. Now, Hicks escaped by deliberately crashing the car and fleeing from Long. He would later be forced to only pay damages on the vehicle plus serve 3 years probation. Imagine that.
Wow.
I mean, how is it they have, I guess they couldn't tie him to anything at this point. So he pays for the broken car and 3 years probation, no jail time at this point. So far in his life, with the exception of all the personal injury stuff, as far as his criminal, he's really kind of getting the slap on the wrist for the most part. Now, in May of 1984, while driving on Nebraska Avenue in Tampa, Long spotted a young woman named Lana Long, the real name Ninjin Tai Long, walking alone.
Just a little side note, Nebraska Avenue is where Carol Baskin was walking when she met her first husband.
Carol fucking Baskin.
Just saying.
Now, Lana was an exotic dancer in the Tampa area and worked at the Starlight Lounge and the Sly Fox Lounge. Now, she had moved to Tampa from Southern California in February to study art and cinema at the University of South Florida. And Long pulled up to Lana and offered her a ride, which she accepted, but he soon pulled his car off the road and took out a knife. And when Lana began screaming and attempting to fight Long, he tied her up and drove to a more remote road where he raped and strangled her. According to the police, Lana Long's body was found face down a few days later, her hands bound behind her back and her legs spread far apart. And the officers measured 5 feet from one heel to the other, which means he had her like almost in a very bad position.
Like almost a split.
Yeah, exactly.
So Michelle Sims was Long's next victim. Born in San Bernardino, California, Sims had been a beauty contestant, but at the time of her murder, she was working as a prostitute. After luring her to his car, Long beat and raped her before slashing her throat repeatedly. Found at the scene were red fibers, human hair, a bare footprint, tire tracks, and semen. Michelle's murder was the one that finally got detectives steered in the right direction. Detectives connected her murder to Lana Long's when the same material, the red nylon fiber, was found on both women. So, classified ad rapes, robberies continued in the Pinellas County area all throughout this time. So he was still raping.
He's still up his old tricks.
This whole time, he's still raping, but now he's incorporating these murders. So Linda Nuttall was assaulted in May of 1984 by Long, but she survived. Long answered an ad to sell some of Nuttall and her husband's furniture. He committed the crime while Nuttall's children were in the house. Police then discovered Long's fourth victim, Elizabeth Loudenbach, on June 24, 1984. Elizabeth's body was badly decomposed when detectives found her. She was laying on her back, fully clothed. They believe that she was killed 17 days earlier on June 8th. Elizabeth was different from Long's other victims, as she was not a drug user, prostitute, or stripper.
Yeah, and she was left fully clothed.
Right. On July 17, 1984, Long was sentenced for an attempted abduction of Mary Hicks. He was only charged $1,500 for damage to her Jaguar plus 3 years probation.
Yeah, that's the one that we mentioned
That's
earlier.
the one we just mentioned. So Vicky Marie Elliott, 21, was killed on September 7, 1984. Vicky waited tables overnight at the Ramada Inn coffee shop, and reports at the time she was hoping to return to Michigan to study to become a paramedic. She disappeared on September 7th. She had asked a neighbor for a ride to work, but by the time the neighbor showed up, Vicky was gone. Police found her body in a patch of scrub northeast of Tampa on November 16th.
That was the one, I believe, where they were convinced that the friend had done this, saying, hey, I showed up, she was gone. They're like, yeah, right. They really pushed and pushed and pushed. They had suspected him for that crime.
Right.
And then finally they were able to actually prove some phone calls and things like that to show that no, this was legit. So a young prostitute named Chanel Williams had been walking along a Tampa street when Long picked her up. Now, Chanel had moved to Tampa from Winter Haven just a month before her murder, and police said she was working as a prostitute. Seems like in that Nebraska area there's a lot of prostitutes.
And like I said earlier, that is where Carol Baskin was walking down the street and met her first husband, Don Lewis.
So you're trying to say that maybe she's a prostitute?
I'm just saying, we went over this when we covered Don Lewis. We actually did an episode on him, his disappearance. And I just did mention that Carol Baskin was walking down Nebraska Avenue when she met her first husband. So you take from that what you will.
Yeah, and a lot of the detectives understand these areas because I think what they do, and I remember in the interview they do with a detective where he's kind of talking about this case, they would go out and they were trying to warn a lot of these prostitutes, which, remember, back then at the time, that's what they were named. They call them sex workers
now. They call them sex workers.
But they refer to them as prostitutes because that's what they were referred to. And unfortunately, because back then it kind of minimized them, so it made them like lesser of people. And so we refer to them as prostitutes because that's how they're referred to in all the research. But if you get to like she was last seen on the street corner of Nebraska Avenue on the evening of September 30th. So this time in Nebraska Avenue, you're starting to see a lot of the seasonal residents are starting to come down. So it's kind of tougher because, you've got people coming in from up north. And, of course, obviously, a lot of people come down. They're going to be traveling this strip because I'm sure they're familiar with it. It's like here in a town, we have it, not so much anymore, but it used to be called Bayshore. And Bayshore in Collier County was...
Bayshore whore.
Exactly. Was one of the areas that was known for this. So detectives were going to this area and they were trying to talk to these sex workers and explain to them, hey, this is what's going on. You need to be careful. But they were scared to do anything because they couldn't get off the street because they had to face their John. So not John, but their pimp, rather. So you kind of have this vicious circle. So that's where, when you become a sex worker, unfortunately, it's never a winning situation. So now, obviously, Nebraska Avenue is a couple spots. There's a couple spots in Tampa, but Nebraska Avenue is one of those hot spots where Bobby Joe Long would peruse for his next victim.
Right.
So after raping and attempting to strangle Chanel Williams, Long pulled out his gun and shot her in the neck. So now he's not strangling this victim, he shot her because maybe she's fighting back.
Right.
And her body was not found until October 7th.
Karen Beth Dinsfriend, 28, was killed on October 14, 1984. Karen is said to have been working as a prostitute at the time and had a history of drug problems. Dinsfriend was found strangled in an orange grove in northeastern Hillsborough County, 7 hours after she was last seen on the sidewalk of North Nebraska Avenue. Mm-hmm. Kimberly Kyle Hops, 22, was killed October 31st, 1984. Hops had been living in the Sulphur Springs neighborhood in Tampa. Although little is known about Hops, she had last been seen walking with a group of prostitutes in mid-October near Nebraska Avenue. Her body was found on an isolated portion of US 301 north of Tampa on Halloween.
Well, that just goes to show you how close these kidnappings and rapes and murders were. So you can just imagine what it was like for the county at this time. Like we always talk about, Hillsborough County had to be panicked. Police detectives were panicked. Like, man, this is happening. And so if you're a woman at that time in this area, you were just scared. You were nervous. You were home early. You didn't want to be out at night, regardless of where your location was or what profession you had. They had to have just been scared.
Yeah. Well, 3 days later, on November 3rd, 1984, Long spotted 17-year-old Lisa McVeigh on her bicycle in northern Tampa. Now, after dragging Lisa to his car, he forced her to perform oral sex and then brought her to his apartment. Unlike his other victims, he raped her repeatedly for more than 26 hours before setting her free. During her captivity, Lisa appealed to the childlike mind of her abductor and offered to be his secret girlfriend. She then elicited sympathy from Long by claiming to be the only child of an ill parent. He was persuaded to release her and did so in a remote location, instructing her to keep her blindfold on for 5 minutes while he escaped. Lisa had committed to memory several details about her abduction and intentionally left fingerprints on several surfaces in Long's bathroom to help police identify her in the event of her death. She was able to provide a description of her assailant and his car, but before Bobby Joe Long was caught, there were 2 more murders.
Yes, there was. Virginia Lee Johnson, who was 18 years old, she was found on November 6th of 1984. Now, she had vanished from, of course, Nebraska Avenue area between Fowler and Fletcher in late October. Now, she was found November 6th near Morris Bridge in Pasco County. Kim Marie Swan, who was 21, was killed on November 11th of 1984, and Kim briefly worked as a dancer at the Sly Fox, but was working to turn her life around, and she and her 1-year-old son Robbie moved into her parents' Carrollwood home, and she enrolled in a vocational program to become a medical technician. So here she's got some aspirations. She's trying to do better for herself, but she's just doing what she can to get where she needs to be. And at this point, Kim was last seen at a convenience store on November 11th. And the next day, a man who was swapping out a billboard on Orient Road found her body under an overpass. She had been strangled.
On November 15th, Bobby Joe Long was pulled over for having a similar vehicle as the one described by Lisa McVeigh. He was photographed and released when police were unable to link him to any verifiable evidence. Although he did not confess, Long felt he had been caught and was relieved, but then surprised when they let him go. But police began surveillance on him after suspecting he was in some way or another connected to the murders.
So they felt pretty strongly that it was Bobby Joe Long. They just had...
They didn't have the evidence to hold him at that time.
Exactly.
And let's take a quick break. Be right back.
Well, on November 16th of 1984, Long was arrested at a movie theater not far from his Tampa home on a warrant for the abduction, kidnapping, and involuntary sexual battery of Lisa McVeigh. Remember, this is the 17-year-old that he let go. Now, at the time of his capture, Long was wanted in 3 Tampa Bay area jurisdictions where investigators had collected multiple forms of forensic evidence, including clothing, these unique red trilobal carpet fibers, semen, ligature marks, and rope knots. And also, they had noticed that the vehicle he was driving, or the perpetrator was driving, had 4 different tires on it, one of being a specific tire that was supposed to be for a Cadillac. It was like a special type of tire that usually was only found on Cadillacs. So these mysterious red trilobal fibers, which had helped police connect the murder victims, was found to match the interior carpeting of Bobby Joe Long's car. And, of course, they were able to match all the different tires and everything. So he goes into the movie theater. He's into the movie theater, and as soon as he goes in, they've got him under surveillance. And they get out and they start going through his car. They're checking out his car. They're checking the tires. They're checking all this stuff. They're looking inside. They pretty much had him convicted before he walked out of the movie theater.
Right.
So...
Well, once in custody, Long was also connected to the recently discovered murder of Vicky Elliott, whose body was found on the same day that Long was arrested. Once in the interview room, Long waived his Miranda rights and agreed to talk to the police. He initially confessed to the abduction and rape of Lisa McVeigh. After the detectives procured a confession for the McVeigh case, their questioning focused on a series of unsolved sexual battery homicides in the Tampa Bay area. As the detectives questioned Long about the murders, he replied, "I'd rather not answer that."
Well, the detectives continued the interrogation and handed Long photographs of the various murder victims. And at this point, Long stated, "The complexion of things sure have changed since you came back into the room. I think I might need an attorney." Well, no attorney was provided, and Long eventually confessed to 8 murders in Hillsborough County and 1 murder in Pasco County. Now, a Hillsborough County Circuit Court judge ruled that a grand jury will hear Long's case. And the Pasco County Circuit Court judge determined that Long should stand trial for the murder of Virginia Johnson. And Long, at this point, he's just going to be held in custody, so they're not going to allow him to get out.
Right. So Hillsborough County is going to do a grand jury, and Pasco County is just going to go ahead and charge him with the murder of Virginia Johnson. And that's the only murder that was in Pasco County.
Exactly.
In January of 1985, a private investigator notified police that he had a copy of a letter Long had written. In the letter, Long detailed an escape plan, a plot to kill a girl, and a suicide plan. The letter was sent to the investigators by a prison inmate that had associated with Long. Long was separated from the other inmates and held in the infirmary area for his physical protection.
So they feared that he was going to kill himself.
Well, apparently he had wrote some letter with big, long escape plan. He was going to kill another girl, and then he was going to commit suicide. All
obviously in prison.
Well,
or in jail, rather.
Jail. He's in jail, and I guess another inmate got a hold of this letter, this plan he had written out, and anyway, Long's psychiatric evaluations began during this time period. Now, he was classified as a sexual sadist. Dr. John Money also documented that he had temporal lobe epilepsy that induced a, quote, altered state of consciousness. Dr. Robert Berlin diagnosed Long with inherent bipolar or manic depressive psychosis as an organic personality syndrome caused by tissue damage to the brain. Dr. Daniel J. Spreehey determined that Long had no mental illness or disease other than severe antisocial personality disorder.
In layman's term, he ain't right.
Well, yeah, no, he wasn't right. On April 15th, 1985, Long was found guilty in the Newport Richey rape case. On April 22nd, 1984, the trial for the murder of Virginia Johnson began. Remember, that's the one in Pasco County. Mm-hmm. The jury took 44 minutes to convict Long, and they recommended the electric chair.
That's the old Sparky for those folks who don't know Florida.
On May 3rd, Long was sentenced to death by electrocution for the murder of Virginia Johnson.
And during the summer of 1985, Assistant State Attorney Michael L. Benito offered a plea bargain agreement to Long, which he accepted. And the plea bargain agreement acknowledged Long's guilt in remaining murder cases, but shortened the lengthy trial process. The agreement was signed, and Long was found guilty of another 8 murders and the abduction and sexual assault of Lisa McVeigh. Now, he received 26 life sentences without the possibility of parole, 24 concurrent, and 2 run consecutively to the first 24, and 7 life sentences with the possibility of parole after 25 years, which we all know it. With all those other charges or sentences, you're not going to get
No,
parole.
He's not getting parole.
And the state retained the option to seek the death penalty for the murder of Michelle Sims.
In mid-July of 1986, Long confessed to a 10th unknown murder victim to his court-appointed attorney. The attorney, Ellis Rubin, attempted to sway the jury towards a lenient sentence by presenting the 10th murder confession as proof as insanity. Long's childhood deviances and head injuries were presented to the court as part of his defense case, but in the summer of 1986, Bobby Joe Long was sentenced to death by electrocution for the murder of Michelle Sims.
So she was trying to basically say, look, he's had a rough life, he's had a lot of head injuries, this is why he's doing these things.
Yes.
So basically, she's saying it's not okay that he did these things, but this is the reason, so this is why he should be treated
this is where we get into aggravated and mitigating factors.
That's the terms I was hoping you would dig out. Thank you.
Yes.
Well, on October 23rd, 2019, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed Long's death warrant, this being the first death warrant signed by DeSantis since he took office in January of 2019. And Long had no final words before his execution on May 23rd of 2019 by lethal injection, which 25 people watched alongside the authorities and members of the media. Now, present at this execution was Lisa McVeigh. Remember, at this time she's a little older, but she was the young lady who
She was 17 at the time.
Exactly. Lula Williams, the mother of Chanel Williams, and Linda Natal, his only other surviving victim. That was the one who all that took place in front of her children at her home.
Right, yeah.
Now, I wanted to look him in the eye, said Lisa McVeigh. I wanted to be the first person he saw. Unfortunately, he didn't open his eyes. Now, after 35 years, we can say we have some peace of mind knowing that justice has been served, said Lula Williams. And Linda Natal said that there was no describing how this moment would feel. It's just surreal, Natal said. But it closes another door for me.
Now, Lisa McVeigh, who is now Lisa Nolan, and also now a deputy for the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office, read a victim's impact statement and asked everyone to remember those who died at Long's hands. Nolan said she had no ill will towards Long and that she had forgiven him. Bobby Joe Long, thank you. Thank you for choosing me instead of another 17-year-old little girl. The reason why I say thank you now is because I have forgiven you for what you have done to me. Had I not forgiven you, I might as well be in my own prison without walls. God has shown me the only way to really be free when someone bestows injustice against you is complete forgiveness, she said. My life changed forever, and for the better. I choose not to remain a victim. I choose to live.
Wow. That's pretty powerful.
Yes.
What a way to overcome that.
And that is, this whole experience is what pushed her to go into law enforcement.
Yeah, she went into law enforcement, and she's actually done, if you can actually Google her on YouTube, and she's done a lot of interviews talking about this particular case.
Yeah, she's actually, just the other night, I watched, there's a show from A&E. I actually found it on Hulu, but it's called I Survived a Serial Killer. That's the name of the show. And was her case. It was her story. She also, her story was dramatized in the 2018 television film Believe Me, The Abduction of Lisa McVeigh, which originally broadcast on Lifetime and is now available apparently on Netflix, I believe. I'm not sure.
I think everything's on Netflix.
So she's been interviewed several times. There's been several true crime shows.
If you
about her,
some of the raw original video like interviews of her, they've got them on YouTube, and you can actually see some of the interviews where she talks about this case. And in a couple of them I watched, you can really see the emotion, like that hurt is still there, and you can see that what it did to her as a child, but yet then she comes back from that, and then you can see just how strong she's become as a woman and a police officer. Well,
one thing that I found super interesting and great, if you will, is she was explaining in that show, I Survived a Serial Killer, that now she's a deputy with the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office, and she said that she's responded to rape victims or victims of sexual assault, and she's able to talk to these victims and say, hey, I understand, and she's able to get down on the same level with these victims and know what they're going through and the best way to help them in those situations.
Yeah, she'd be a little more compassionate.
Yeah, and I think that, I'm not saying that everybody should be raped just to make themselves a better police officer, but if
her situation has made her a better police officer.
Right, that's what I'm trying to say.
That's
what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and that's you can see that actually if you go, you can see that it's a documentary or the TV series, the show.
The show is called I Survived a Serial Killer.
Yep.
So, but that's just one episode of that show. There's a bunch of different episodes, different cases. I'm just talking about the one.
The one that's her.
I just happened to come upon it on Hulu the other night, like 3 nights ago, and I was like, "Oh my god, we're getting ready to record this. I'm going to watch this right now." And yeah.
Yeah, if you listen to her story, it's pretty scary. And then if you listen to because remember, Elise is still there, which was his girlfriend. So she's done some interviews on YouTube. And I tell you, if you really want to get a good understanding of Bobby Joe Long, go watch on YouTube his interrogations, because there's one it's almost like 2 hours long. You don't have to watch that. There's short excerpts where you got I don't want to say highlights, but I'll say highlights for lack of a better term. But if you watch some of the interviews that he gave to police, you get the sense that this son of a bitch has killed more women than they know of. There's a lot more women out there.
I believe there's more victims.
Because the way he's describing it. And I think at one point I remember seeing where they were asking him about one specific girl, and he's like, I don't know who that is. He goes, oh, she might have – no, I don't know who that is. And so it's almost like, wait a minute, you were just about to say something. They haven't found this girl. But you can see he's very matter-of-fact but nonchalant about what actually transpired. So if you want to know more about Bobby Joe Long, he was an awful, horrible serial killer who had a horrible life beginning. And I think a lot of his early on childhood stuff probably did play a huge role in what he became. And sadly, his previous life, if you will, as a child, pretty much ended up horrific for some women out there because of the way his mother treated him and how he perceived his mother to be, I guess. And he hated women, so his only revenge was to go after them, basically because of what his mother had done to him. I don't know how that all psyche works, but you can actually just go into YouTube and see some of that stuff. So this case here is just one that's kind of been on our list for a while, and it's really it's one of the more notorious serial killers in Florida.
Right. So, yeah, definitely.
Laura, do you have anything else you want to add to this case tonight?
No, that's it.
Okay.
Again, if anyone would like to support the show, please subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/Palmahawk Media. That's PALMAHAWK Media.
And check out our website at paradiseafterdark.com for links to all of our social media, Patreon, merch store, and much, much more.
And please make sure to subscribe and rate and review on whatever platform you are listening to. That really helps us branch out and reach a wider audience.
And as Ken from Paradise After Dark, I would like to say thank you for listening
to Paradise After Dark.
Dark, 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 dark.